For 7 years, Claire and Daniel shared a queen-sized bed in their 14th-floor Chicago apartment. Yet somewhere between the pillowcases and the duvet cover, an invisible line had formed, not drawn from anger or explosive arguments, but from the slow accumulation of unspoken words and quiet evenings where the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. He occupied the left side with his phone glowing against his face until midnight, while she lay on the right tracing sentences in novels. She barely absorbed their hands never brushing, except by accident when reaching for the water glass on the nightstand, and even then they murmured apologies as if touching had become an intrusion rather than an intimacy, the space between them widening not with slammed doors but with the gentle, persistent erosion of shared silence that neither had the courage to name, until it had grown into a chasm neither knew how to cross. Their apartment overlooked a glittering grid of Chicago's evening lights, a view Claire once loved to watch from the floor-to-ceiling window while Daniel wrapped his arms around her waist. But somewhere in the 3rd year she stopped looking outward and began noticing only the small rituals that had calcified into walls, the way he reheated his morning coffee 3 times before drinking it, the precise military folds of his work shirts stacked in the dresser, the way he chewed his toast in exact 30-second intervals without ever glancing up to meet her eyes across the breakfast counter. These were not annoyances, but monuments to a life they had stopped building together, each habit a brick in a fortress neither had intended to construct, and Claire found herself studying him, like a stranger on a train, wondering when the man who once whispered dreams against her temple had become this quiet silhouette moving through rooms they once filled with laughter, his presence now a gentle ghost haunting the home they still technically shared, but no longer inhabited together. The unraveling arrived not as a storm, but as soft rain on a Tuesday evening, the kind that taps gently against glass without demanding attention, when Claire prepared his favorite meal, lemon rosemary chicken with roasted potatoes, and set the table with the blue ceramic plates they bought on their honeymoon in Maine, watching him eat to polite bites before murmuring tastes fine, and retreating behind his laptop screen while she sat across from him, with her fork suspended midair, realizing in that suspended moment that her hunger had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the desperate craving for a single sentence beginning with "I feel" or "I miss" or "I am afraid." Anything that would bridge the quiet continent stretching between their chairs, the silence so thick she could almost taste its metallic bitterness as she pushed her own plate away, untouched, the steam from the potatoes curling upward like unanswered questions dissipating into the air between them, long after midnight when Daniel's breathing had deepened into sleep on his side of the bed. Claire rose and walked barefoot through the dark apartment, to the cedar chest tucked beside the bookshelf, the one holding relics from a time when their love still had fingerprints, and lifted the lid, to find concert tickets faded to pale ghosts, a sunflower pressed brittle between pages of a poetry book, and a handwritten note on hotel stationery from a rainy weekend in Portland that read, "I'll never stop choosing you," in ink now softened by years, her fingers trembling not from grief but from the devastating clarity that love rarely dies in fire or fury, but evaporates molecule by molecule in the quiet spaces between good mornings and good nights, each unshared thought a drop of moisture stolen from the atmosphere until nothing remained but dry air where something living once breathed. Dawn arrived in pale grey strokes across the skyline as Claire sat at the kitchen table, with 2 steaming mugs of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, exactly how he took it, and when Daniel emerged rubbing sleep from his eyes, his first instinct was to reach for his phone until he saw her there waiting, not with tears or accusations, but with a quiet steadiness that made him pause, and place the device face down on the counter, without being asked, the simple gesture landing between them like the first stone of a bridge. "We need to talk," she said, her voice softer than he remembered, and he sat across from her, not as a defendant, but as a traveler who had wandered too far from his compass, the morning light catching dust motes dancing between them like tiny witnesses to the fragile hope that people could still find their way back to each other after years of walking parallel paths, without ever turning their heads. What unfolded in that kitchen was not a battle, but an excavation. Claire speaking of loneliness that lived in shared spaces, of making love to a man whose mind was already at work before his body had left the bed, of folding laundry beside him while feeling utterly alone, Daniel admitting his terror of becoming his father, who abandoned his family without explanation, of burying himself in work emails because success felt safer than vulnerability, of loving her so deeply he'd grown afraid to show it lest he fail her as his own father had failed him. They were not broken people, but weary travelers who had simply forgotten to check their maps, their hands resting palms up on the wooden table like offerings. No grand declarations or promises to change overnight, just two adults finally admitting that the space between them had become a country neither wanted to inhabit alone, and that crossing back would require not magic but the daily courage to speak when silence felt safer. 3 months later, the bed remained a queen size with the same thread count sheets and matching pillows, but the invisible line had dissolved not through dramatic gestures, but through small rebellions against silence, a hand finding the other while watching a documentary about ocean depths, coffee prepared exactly how he liked it, not from obligation, but because she still remembered the precise ratio of beans to water. He preferred his phone remaining in the bedroom while they ate dinner. Together 3 nights a week without screens between them, they still had quiet evenings and separate hobbies and nights when exhaustion won over connection. But now the silence felt like peace rather than abandonment, like two trees growing side by side with roots slowly intertwining beneath the soil. Love returning not in a lightning strike, but as morning dew imperceptible drop by drop until everything glistened with the quiet miracle of being seen again after years of living in the same house but different worlds.